This is episode 520 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, I promise I don't coordinate my travel plans for family vacations with Albuquerque Journal cartoonist John Trevor, but I was recently in Texas for Independence Day holiday, kind of a long trip. I'll describe a little bit. But meanwhile, on Sunday, July 9th, right after I came back, John Trevor, Albuquerque Journal cartoonist, has Texas and New Mexico cartoon. Of course, New Mexico proudly the abortion capital of the American Southwest, and legalized weed. On the Texas side of the equation, they have no EV mandates, and I think are incredibly unlikely to have them in the future. We'll be talking about those EV mandates in just a second, but potentially in the not too distant future, New Mexicans could be hitting Texas and the Texas state line to buy vehicles that don't have the same level of requirements attached to them. And boy, I can tell you from my own personal experience recently in Texas that Texas has the economic model that works. New Mexico does not.
Yeah, and it's amazing how Mr. Trevor always seems to just capture the essence of all of these issues very early on. So we'll have to follow this one, and I know there's a lot more going on in this podcast where we'll talk about at least half of that equation, the electric vehicle side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. But as a born and raised Cincinnatian who moved here after Washington, D.C., time spent there, and also visited New Mexico quite a bit, having family ties to this state, and traveling to New Mexico, specifically Albuquerque, growing up. I have seen more than I care to tell you the part of Texas from Amarillo to the New Mexico and Oklahoma state lines that are the old Route 66. But that is a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall state. On this particular family vacation, flew into Dallas, went all the way up to the Choctaw Casino up in Oklahoma for a concert for my daughter who just had a birthday, came back down to Dallas, and then went down further into Texas, Waco, San Antonio, all the way to the beaches of the Texas coast, Port Aransas and Corpus Christi. Got to see a good, healthy chunk of the state of Texas, and basically there was construction the whole darn way. Roads being expanded, being rebuilt, private sector businesses being constructed, housing being built, the Tesla factory outside of Austin being constructed. And I'm told that is the second largest enclosed indoor space. The only other building bigger than that Tesla building will be is the Everett, Washington Boeing factory, which I've also toured. Didn't get into the Tesla factory. Not sure it's open. It's still under construction. They are building cars there, but I don't know if it's open to the public for tours or anything. But yeah, I can say without equivocation that Texas is booming. People are flocking there. Jobs are flocking there. And the model of pro-growth, zero income tax policies is working quite well for Texas. Setting aside the fact that while their weather is not much different these days than New Mexico, it's less pleasant and more humid in most of the areas we visited in Texas, with the exception of the beach, than it is here in the Albuquerque area. So it's it's not a perfect place, but man, when it comes to jobs, economic growth, Texas is really booming.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Paul. And, one of the things that New Mexico prides itself on is our fantastic weather and low humidity. And as Texas shows us, unfortunately, that really doesn't matter when it comes to jobs and economic development. If it did, if that was the single biggest factor, New Mexico would have a lot more factories and employment than it does. And I was listening to the radio the other day, is that as hot as it is in Phoenix, I've heard a lot of people were calling into a particular local radio show. You can get used to the heat of Phoenix, but the callers that had lived in Dallas, for example, said you never get used to the heat and humidity of Dallas. So we have that. We have something going for us, but it's not the right thing when it comes to what we need to do for economic prosperity here in our state.
Yeah, and it's not why we went to Texas by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a great on-the-ground experience, really contrasting the much more capitalistic approach to economic activity and governance in that state versus New Mexico being primarily government-driven. Definitely both states have their share of oil and gas, but when it comes to production, I can't imagine that as a percentage of the economy or divided out by the population that Texas is much bigger than New Mexico. I mean, Texas is a bigger oil producing state than New Mexico, and they're not really in danger of falling behind us, but on a per population basis, that might be a data point that I need to come up with. But if you do get the chance, if you go to Texas, and it's not an enterprise that is at the center of any cities, they choose to be in rural areas. Of course, when you're in the gas station convenience world and you build them the size of the Houston Astrodome, just kidding, but Buc'ees are really amazing. They restore my faith in modern capitalism and freedom, just a melting pot of people coming into those mammoth, you can't really call them convenience marts, but they are on the roads. They are big gas stations with all kinds of unique products. They are a tourist experience in and of themselves. So if you are on the road in Texas, I think they're limited to pretty much the eastern half of Texas. I think a Buc'ees, if corporate is listening, would do gangbusters on the Route 66 route near Amarillo, anywhere along that route. That is one busy stretch of interstate. But if you go to El Paso or Lubbock, I don't think they have them in that general area. You got to get into deep in the heart of Texas, so to speak, Wally. So highly recommend, we don't make recommendations on businesses very often, but Buc'ees is a really amazing place and very clean restrooms, I might add.
Yeah, and I've seen some videos on it, Paul, and I'm envious that you got to go to Buc'ees. Some people might like to go to Disneyland. I want to go to Buc'ees at some point in my life, so I'll put that on my bucket list.
Your Buc'ees list.
Oh, no pun intended.
Well, as the father of 3 children who I discuss somewhat regularly, they had a fabulous time as well and enjoyed all the treats that were up for offering at the Buc'ees. So getting into the more theoretical data as opposed to on the ground research, as I did in Texas recently, a report from Axios came out recently showing the switch in kind of economic activity between 2012 and 2022. This has received a fair amount of attention in the media, broadly speaking, because it highlights that the center of gravity, if you will, in the economy of the United States is steadily shifting south and east, south and west, with southeast states in the south doing particularly well as opposed to other states in the South. So the South is not completely unified in being a place where more and more economic activity is happening. Texas, definitely a state where economic activity is shifting to in this Axios report. The 2 leading states, the 2 darkest blue states, were Utah and North Dakota. North Dakota's had an oil boom, and Utah is just a very healthy state economy as well, much different from Texas, but equally healthy. Sadly, New Mexico has lost in its share of GDP. We're one of the states that is kind of lost at the higher end, between 10 and 20%. The report doesn't break out the overall data, but we're definitely one of the brighter orange, which is not a good place to be in terms of your state. And, we haven't got data beyond 2022 in this report, but that oil and gas boom was in full swing by 2010, at least 2009 or 2010, 2020, 2019 was already boom years. So the fact that North Dakota is one of the top performing states, while New Mexico remains in that negative column, is not a good thing. So interesting report there, Wally, and I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, it is interesting how we talk about Texas, we talk about North Dakota, and they have not only benefited tremendously from oil and gas, but generally their economies have, and New Mexico has not. So you just have to look at the underlying reasons for that, and I think there are many of them. But not to sound, in the words of Forrest Gump, that's all I have to say about that, Paul. It's like I think the issues are there, but oil and gas in and of itself does not make for a broad, diversified economy. It's all the other things that happen. And in fact, in the case of a place like New Mexico, it actually is turning out to be the policies that are enabled to be paid for by oil and gas money actually keep other industries from growing here.
Yeah, and this particular report doesn't necessarily play out along partisan lines inherently. Washington performs decently well. Oregon, California are all in the positive. Certainly, California had a good stretch there with the IT boom. Whether that's the main factor or not, the Midwest, being maybe punching above your weight, going down, certainly can impact, because of course this is all a relative. Where are you in 2022 relative to 2012? Most of those Midwestern and New England states are going to see a reduction relative to other places that are much faster growing. So no state, draw a line from Minnesota in the west down south all the way to Louisiana. All those states are in the negative. Mississippi, Alabama. Now Tennessee is in the positive, but again, you hit Kentucky, Virginia, anything north or east of those states is all in the negative. New Mexico being the only state in the 48, lower 48, west of the Texas, Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska line. We stick out in the American West, us and Wyoming, which it's an interesting place. Wyoming, for all of its flaws, tends to have high personal incomes, and not many people live in Wyoming for a variety of reasons. But it's a worthwhile report, something needs to be discussed and analyzed by folks up in Santa Fe.
Yeah, and then Paul, the other thing, as you were discussing that I was thinking of is that, industries have life cycles. So, we had the Rust Belt in certain Rust Belt states as say steel and auto production phased out, did a better job transitioning to the next thing. But the point is they definitely took a hit. Now we're seeing in California, for lots of reasons, the tech kind of industries, the Googles and Facebooks of the world and the Twitters, they aren't nearly the big employers that they once were. And, even in a place like New Mexico that managed to get, say, an Intel plant, we weren't necessarily able to double down on that and get the growth. A lot of that went to Chandler, Arizona. So I guess the other point is that, if you don't make progress when things are going good for you in whatever industry there it is, in terms of your broad economic climate, you may suffer more on the back end. So that it is an interesting report. I'll take another look at that, with those questions in mind.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. It's the first one of that kind of design that I've ever seen. So we'll be sure to keep track of those data as time moves forward. Now, getting back to the Trevor cartoon and the electric vehicles, this is where the proverbial rubber hits the road on that. Just a year ago, new regulations, they took effect in the sense that they are on the books, but they don't actually take effect until, in any significant way, until model year 2025, which really we'll be talking about this a year from now when the 2025 vehicles come out on dealers' lots. By then, the regulation that 7% of model year 2025 vehicles sold in New Mexico will have to be electric. That was, adopted through the Environmental Improvement Board at the behest of Governor Lujan Grisham. That EIB is not elected. It is appointed by her, and she can basically get whatever she wants done through the EIB. Now, we had a legislative session. We saw the governor's vetoes raise some hackles with the left-wing environmental base of her political support and her party. And I suspect that this latest move to really ramp up on the EV requirements is partially in relation to that. And as we discussed at the time, just a year ago or so, California had already adopted a ban on gas-powered internal combustion vehicles by 2035. And we kind of were looking at this and wondering, because this is kind of a unique approach, the states were empowered, California being the first and really notoriously for a very long time, to have its own standards for vehicle emissions. We didn't know if New Mexico was going to follow right behind California or what we were going to do. Well, that mystery has been solved, come to fruition, if you will. The governor has said that she wants to shove through the EIB a 43% EV mandate starting in 2027, and that requirement will then go up to 82% by 2032. So I guess she's leaving a little bit of mystery out there, because California goes right up to 2035 and goes full cold turkey on electric vehicles. Maybe she doesn't want the headline, Lujan Grisham bans gas-powered vehicles in New Mexico. Anyway, the fact is that chances are very good that the EIB will embrace this, because they are kind of put there for their loyalty to Michelle Lujan Grisham. And she will be basically gone from governor's mansion by the time this regulation takes effect. So this is a big issue and big concern, and we'll just see if there's any opposition from bigger, better funded groups like the auto dealers in front of the EIB, and if we can do some more to educate people as to what is coming down the road at them.
Yeah, this Paul is going to be an issue that will definitely have legs, and there is going to be pain and suffering. Although, as you say, most of the pain and suffering will be caused after the governor is out of office, and nothing's better than to burnish your credentials with whatever group, but not have any of the pain or downside of that policy happen until you leave office. So, this whole EV issue, it's very interesting. California is, they're doing pretty good on their electric vehicles. There's a lot more wealth in California. There's a lot more daily commute in California. And there's a lot less rural population in California, some things that maybe make that a little better. But even there, they're having their issues with that. New Mexico really doesn't have any of those starting point strengths for electric vehicles that California has, but we're going to follow them, right along the path, evidently, if this goes through. But I don't think it will be without huge downsides. And, it's one of those things. Here's the thing, Paul. It's a little bit like my cell phone here. So here's my cell phone. You think that the power is in the cell phone. And believe me, there's a lot of power in this. But the real power is in the networks that drive this. You know, it's in the Wi-Fi. It's in the Wi-Fi connection. It's in the 5G connection, and it's all these applications that are hosted on servers in a network. Well, the electric car is fine. It's one thing, and you know they certainly do work. But if you don't have adequate charging in places and at the times you need them, that is a problem. And we see very, very little discussion about that. Where that's really the big issue. If there were charging stations on every corner, like there are gas stations at this point, I think you would see the market take over. But that is really one of the huge issues. And again, a place like New Mexico, where the limit of some of these EVs, which is, you know, a couple 100 miles in some cases, there aren't even gas stations. You know, driving to Roswell from New Mexico, you have to go the right way to have a gas station in that kind of couple 100 miles, much less an electric vehicle charging station. So there are a lot of issues with this from a New Mexico point of view.
Absolutely. And I will only note from the automaker point of view, there are issues as well because Ford, as we talked about, I think recently, they're expecting to lose $3 billion this year on sales of electric vehicles. That's according to CNN. Now, they overall are profiting between $9 and $11 billion. But those electric vehicles, they claim they're going to make a profit soon, and maybe they will. But I think the level of dedication, some automakers are all in on EVs, and that translates to the dealerships, and that's going to cut down on your political opposition to this kind of thing in New Mexico. Some manufacturers are less kind of all in when it comes to the future being electric. But yeah, this is a very, very politicized and political area now of our economy. And just one more thing before we leave this alone, Mark Perry at American Enterprise Institute has that fascinating chart where he shows different items and how much inflationary impact is being had over a few decades. Autos have traditionally, even though they're much overall better, especially in terms of safety and cleanliness when it comes to their emissions, the automobile of today is in most ways superior to the automobile of 10, 15, 30, 40 years ago for a lower price adjusted for inflation. I suspect that trend line is going to change directions as we are in the midst of this forced switch to electric vehicles. So there's a plethora of different impacts here. And I think it really hits home with the Texas model is you can buy the vehicle you want, whatever's on the market. New Mexico's model is we are going to force you ultimately, if you want to buy your car in New Mexico, to buy the vehicle we want you to buy. And it'll be interesting to see as time goes by. You know, if Heinrich's elected governor after Lujan Grisham, there's no question that he will push very, very hard to make this happen. I would not be surprised if Heinrich imposed some more draconian regulations to force these vehicles into people's garages, whether they want them or not. You know, all kinds of things coming up with this potential regulation, but it's a big one.
Yeah, and then just, one other point to add, Paul, to this is that in addition to the stations is the electric generating capacity and transmission and distribution infrastructure that's necessary. You know, the people who are most satisfied based on the research that I've done with their electric vehicles are those that are able to use it for commuting and charge their vehicles in their own garage or at their own residence overnight. They're like, yeah, it's a very convenient thing for them. That's not a huge percentage of the population necessarily. If you live in an apartment, if you live in a place that you don't have the garage space for a charger, it can be a very big issue. And just to And then to put another fine point on it, we are a long, long way from renewables driving this from an environmental point of view. And so don't think that just if you, you don't have any necessary pollution from charging and driving your car, but that electricity has to be created somewhere. And, you know, Paul, this is, as we record this at July 11th, at 12:26 p.m. right now in PNM service territory, only 11% of their electricity is being generated by renewable sources. So that means if you're charging your electric vehicle right now, 89% of that is coming from coal, natural gas, or nuclear. So it's this is a complex issue that a lot of things can go wrong, and these mandates seem like just the clumsiest way to do it. You know what I mean? They just seem crazy. It's this thing that I've mentioned before called aspirational rulemaking. You just put this big rule out there and then you wait until it proverbially hits the fan until you adjust it. So, but it looks like that's what we may be trying to do here in New Mexico.
That's kind of the governor's strategy writ large on a lot of these environmental issues. And kind of, I don't want to get too far into the weeds because we've already spent a fair amount of time on this, but it's not just cars. And remember, when it comes to the federal government and a lot of these regulatory decisions, it's not just about cars. Cars are separate from pickup trucks and commercial trucks, let alone 18-wheelers. So Governor Lujan Grisham's environmental department recently signed a letter along with a few left-wing blue states to essentially demand that California be the standard for what happens in New Mexico when it comes to trucks and their level of electrification. Pickup trucks and vans in California, 5% by next year, ramping up to 55% for pickup trucks and vans by 2035. Then you've got what are called rigid non-tractor trucks, going from 9% in 2024 to 75% in 2035. And tractor trailers, 5% next year, 40% 2035. The governor essentially is saying, for whatever reason, either she doesn't have the power to do this or she is unwilling to do this, at least as things stand right now. So she is asking the Biden administration to impose those regulations. I suspect that it's because those semi-trucks and bigger delivery vehicles and whatnot don't have to be bought in New Mexico. She's banking on the fact that people will just stay home and buy the vehicle here. I don't think she's accurate in that. But pickup trucks and vans would be the interesting one because there's too many guys and gals around New Mexico with those big dually pickup trucks and their diesel exhaust and Cummins engines. I think they're going to be the hardest nut to crack. So maybe she just doesn't want to upset the big truck drivers around the state of New Mexico. But anyway, she is all in on this. That's the upshot.
Yeah, that is the upshot, and we're going to get we'll get to see how this plays out in terms of putting the policy in place. And this will be, as they say, stay tuned. This will be an interesting one to watch. That's for sure.
Yeah. And you can bet that we will be working very hard to share this information and push back as best as we can. Kind of a bit of housekeeping. The RGF, my op-ed on the kids count report ran statewide. I'm not going to revisit that, but we posted a number of different pieces at heirsoфenchantment.com on that. We talked about it on 2 separate podcasts. The kids count report should be a wake-up call. New Mexico's 50th. All that we see from the left and Voices for Children is not, maybe we shouldn't have locked down during COVID. Maybe spending more money on education and other government programs isn't the way to solve our issues with children in the state. Maybe we should do something differently, focusing on educational choice, economic opportunity. That was an op-ed that I wrote along those lines that is now posted at the Rio Grande Foundation and Heirs of Enchantment site, and it appeared in numerous news outlets around the state. I'll remind people that the Opportunities for All Kids, that's our project, oaknm.org, that day-long education conference, free to attendees, September 22nd at St. Pius X High School here in Albuquerque. We want to get a good crowd out for that particular event and get people thinking and prioritizing this. The media seems to just accept that we're dead last. The politicians in Santa Fe, the governor, either accept or have no strategies for it. And I'm talking about, of course, the people who can actually pass laws, the Democrats. We're just kind of in this horrible situation where New Mexico kids desperately need a change, but all the political classes and media seem to want to do is just double down on existing failures.
Yeah, and then, you know, Paul, it's interesting to watch the excuses, and it's like, well, this was 2021 data, and if we just wait for 2022 data, it's going to be a lot better. Let's wait and see when that 2022 data comes out, because again, what has changed between those 2 years is not a whole lot other than throwing more money into the system, not changing how the system operates. So, you know, if they're on their last gasp of excuses relative to education in New Mexico, I have a feeling that give it one more year, and they will be out of excuses. Not that they won't proffer them, but I don't see where they go from here in terms of, say, either we're just going to live with it and we don't care, or we're going to do something about it.
Yeah, now you and I would have, I believe, booted these people out of office a long time ago. And just because you run out of excuses doesn't mean the voters will agree and vote differently. And that's really where the rubber has to hit the road, is with the voters of the state of New Mexico. So that's the real issue, and we'll see what happens there. Couple of interesting articles, and this is why, Wally, whenever I go on vacation out of town, and I'm a religious reader and subscriber of the Albuquerque Journal, check out especially Friday, July 7th. That was a very interesting newspaper for a couple of reasons that I'm going to talk about here in a second. I always get those papers delivered. I don't really enjoy reading online a newspaper. I need that lovely newsprint in my fingers.
Although even newsprint doesn't rub off nearly as much as it used to in the old days. So
yeah, but Martin Heinrich was in town recently, and Mitch Landrieu, he's an advisor to the president. They were out touting some of the great spending programs happening, and this story under the front page above the fold headline: "Powered Up, Heinrich White House Official Tour Electrification Upgrade at Family Home." Now, we know that when it comes to policy issues, everything could be coming down around us, but Martin Heinrich will be there out touting electrification of vehicles and all things in your house. It is really this story highlights that. If you really read the story for what it says, it discusses a mother of four. No husband is mentioned. I presume that she's raising these children by herself. Lives in the International District, which once upon a time, not too long ago, was known as the war zone. It's one of the most crime-ridden areas of Albuquerque. We can all agree on that. She received $10,500 in grants through the federal government. And one of the bills, I think maybe the bipartisan infrastructure bill, I don't really know and don't really care. It's federal dollars. And here are the things that she received her money for: updating and a more powerful and efficient electric system, advanced light bulbs, air sealing, high efficiency shower heads, low flow toilets, and other improvements. Now, one thing not on that list, and I just read this story, and I'm looking back into it to get the correct words, but the mom specifically mentioned that one of the things that her kids had to do was to climb up on the roof to add water to the family's swamp cooler when it got hot in order to make that system function. Now, no new swamp cooler or no electric, no shift over to a air conditioning system that is not a swamp cooler was mentioned. There was all kinds of savings touted, but you're a single mom with 4 kids living in one of the worst areas of the city of Albuquerque. You think maybe that $10,500 could have been used for a little more high priority projects or uses around the house?
Yeah, well, and if they didn't, it's borderline on criminal. Maybe get them a new swamp cooler motor to actually pump the water, or maybe even a new master cool swamp cooler. Paul, I'm one of the increasing minority of people that actually like swamp coolers. As long as I've lived in a part of town that's not like right down in the valley and more humid, there are a few times of the year where it's a little bit uncomfortable, but the rest of the time I really like it. And it's one of those things that if they would have put a new HVAC unit, a refrigerated air, probably would have made her utility costs go up dramatically. But swamp coolers are getting to be a lot like, from an environmental point of view, a lot like gas stoves. They're just like, don't do the math. You know what I mean? We just don't like them. And then as long as we continue to use coal and other sources of energy that are not wind and solar, people say, well, but they use water. Well, yeah, you can use water in your swamp cooler, but the amount of electricity it uses is a lot lower. Or you can get refrigerated air, pay a lot more for it, and then the water's just used making the electricity up in the Farmington area. So it is interesting. So if it's out of sight and out of mind, that makes it good environmentally. Evidently, that's the standard we're starting to use more and more.
Yeah, it's whether it's electric vehicles or swamp coolers versus refrigerated air, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yes.
Everything has its impact on the environment. The only thing that doesn't is sitting in your house in 100-degree heat with the windows open and just gutting it out because it's going to be hot.
Well, and even then, if you're not going to die, to keep yourself from dying, you're going to have to drink a lot more water in that situation. There's no doubt about it. And not to make light of the heat, we're having a lot of heat. And believe me, if you don't have some sort of a source of cooling, or at least a mega fan and a cold towel over your face, you're going to be getting really hot here in New Mexico.
Exactly. All right. Well, in the same edition of the Albuquerque Journal, it was noted that the city of Albuquerque was receiving $18.2 million from the federal government for 20 electric buses.
Oh, we're back to this again.
We're back to this again. I don't think Build Your Dreams is involved in this particular episode, but I did very complicated calculations here. That's $910,000 per bus. According to the American Public Power Association, they're an advocacy group for this kind of electrification. An average diesel transit bus costs about $500,000 compared with $750,000 for an electric bus. So we obviously are getting a fantastic deal here, only about $160,000 more than what this trade association claims that an electric bus costs. But we've talked about the bus system, the fact that they're not charging fares at all, the crime issues, plummeting ridership. It is time to, much like the federal government with the student loan program, and of course that's been an issue recently with the Supreme Court. It's time to unwind some of these programs, whether it's the student loan program or the city bus network. They are failed models. They are not working, and pouring more money into, in this case, new electric buses is just good money after bad. And, this is what you get, though. This is the problem with a federal government that can print its own money and spend into oblivion. They'll raise inflation. They'll hurt families, especially savers. But gosh darn it, they are just going to shower unnecessary and wasteful spending on whether it's individual families, things that they don't really need relative to other needs, or electric buses on the city of Albuquerque. It's just such wasteful spending.
Yeah, and we'll have to see how these buses, hopefully they work better than the last ones that didn't work, but even the specs of the last buses, they were barely able to make the route, the mileage of the route that was called for. But keep in mind that, you know, when they say, okay, this bus can go pick a number, 200 miles, that tends to be on a flat surface. And, you know, New Mexico and in Albuquerque in particular, you go up and down the hills and it takes a lot more. It takes more in the very cold and very warm parts of the year because you have to heat and cool those buses. So, you know, we'll see how these work. There's no question we're spending a lot of money on them. Will we get a lot of benefit on that from them? That remains to be seen. And as we've said many times now, mass transit is quickly becoming almost a boondoggle unto itself. It's almost like the most inefficient form, both fiscally and environmentally, because when you put these big pieces of equipment to play and only have a few people riding them most of the time, there's no way that that's efficient from any sense of that word.
Yeah, well, that would be thinking beyond just mass transit, good.
Yes.
Personal vehicle, bad.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's kind of the level of thought process that goes on. And it's not just average people out on the street. It is all the way down from Senator Martin Heinrich and his ilk in the Biden administration as well. All right. Well, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.